Welcome to the ultimate beginner's guide for Rebecca. If you wanted to do some insane damage, you should stick around. As you can see here on the right side, my Rebecca stats are pretty
nice.
Now this build is more range oriented. As you can see, I do have this spectrum here that does give me some more range, but you can swap that out if you want. For starters, we have 2 wing violations for that max sanity and that skill damage, and then we do have the midnight sun here for some hydro skill damage and skill duration. Now having 2 violations is optional. I'll get to that in a second here. Let's keep going. Misty Veil helps out with the attack speed of your summons and the range, but if you want maximum damage and don't care too much about range, then go ahead and use the Frosty Torrent, as this does cap out at 11.4 attack percent whenever your hydro character uses a skill. Now I did change the build on screen for you guys so it could actually be more accurate of what you guys would actually be running, because I was running that spectrum in there to test some things out, but this would be the build that you're actually running here. Now I do have Serenity here, which is for sanity upkeep, but the optimal would be uplift if you want that maximum damage. You wouldn't really be using the hunt down unless you're doing a weapon build, and then using resolve for the less percentage of HP you have to do more damage, and you would use morale to have the higher percent of HP you has do more damage. And to go back to having 2 violations, you could honestly just replace that with another spectrum, which is attack and range. It just depends on if you want skill damage and more sanity, or if you want attack and more range. That's completely dependent on you. Now the actual way for maximum damage on bossing, because the argument would be that the boss is moving around, yes, that is true, but me personally, I don't have a problem with that. But you would want to use her ultimate, Lot of Love Do, because as you can see, it does more damage based on the stacks for Passion of Love that you have. So if you have her second dupe, then you can get 8 stacks, but if you do not, that would be 6 stacks. But either way, you should still be doing an insane amount of damage as long as you are making sure to keep up with that. The other thing to note is that the Serenity does not stack, and I find that kind of weird because I feel like they should say that specifically inside of the Demon Wedge. But because it doesn't stack, you would only want to put 1 Serenity onto one of your side character partners. Never put that on the main. Focus more on damage. So yes, uplift would be the wedge that you want there. Never put Serenity on your main character, as like I said, it does not stack. Now Rebecca is both good at DPSing mobs and bosses, and I'm going to show you here. This is my range build. This is not my maximum 222. This is my 190. But as you can see, this just covers the whole map basically. This is why I'm usually running the skill range, because 9 times out of 10 I don't need more skill damage or attack, because the range and the amount of percentage that I have right now is actually enough. And this is my bossing build, which has significantly more duration, 22 seconds as you can see there, but the range is relatively smaller. Now this does work with bosses because of the fact that 9 times out of 10 I'm in their face and I'm kind of up in there, but you guys probably don't want to build like that. So I would say just go ahead and run this other build, which is like my main overall build that I use for everything, because it does both farming and bossing. Just make sure to replace Serenity with uplift. The bossing is literally only for the duration upkeep, so it just lasts longer, so you don't have to use your sanity as much, but either build works. Now let's talk about the attack. As you can see, attack only affects your elemental attack, be it hydro, pyro, anything like that. Scale damage and attack never mix and mesh. You think that's how it would work, right? That's actually wrong. So let's talk about that more real quick. If you look at her passive, whenever she deals a hit, she does mark Passion of Love. Now what Passion of Love does is a completely separate entity of hydro damage from the base that the game has, and it does 6 stacks. So the more hydro attack you do, or the more hydro attack you have, actually does scale pretty good with her. So she's honestly a character that you can do pure skill damage, or you can do pure attack. Now I do have another build for her that does have 8,000 hydro attack, a little bit lower on the skill damage there, but it does shred. And as you can see, other characters just don't simply have that passive where they do a dot. That's only unique to Rebecca. I would honestly say she is the only character in the game that benefits more from having that hydro attack as high as possible rather than skill damage, just because of how high those numbers can get. Now her best weapon is actually Amber Glow, and let me explain why. Now I'm gonna go ahead and settle this right now. Attack does indeed affect skill damage, and before you click off this video, let me go ahead and show you proof. Go ahead and look at this run with the Exiled Fangs. As you can see, it's roughly around that 11,500 to 12,500. Now go ahead and take a look at this run with Amber Glow. You notice that immediate damage change? Oh wait, that's not enough proof? Okay, keep the footage rolling.
Nice.
Now let's take a look at win rate.
I don't know.
See, now the crazy part about it is if you actually go to the skills and look at the skill damage with rain wraith on, it is 3,208. Now, if I'm to go over and let's take the freaking amber glow, for example, go back to the skills, you would think it would be the same, right? That's straight wrong. It's only 2890. And DNA Des, I need you to get your shit together because the math's not mathing. Now, before anybody tries to say I didn't test this that much, I tested this for 30 minutes to an hour multiple times to make sure that these numbers were indeed accurate. And that wasn't only switching the weapon, but the actual build, taking off all of my demon wedges, making sure that there was nothing on, putting one attack percent on, putting one kill damage wedge on, and I noticed the difference every single time I were to do that. So to say that attack does not affect skill damage, I don't know what type of crack cocaine you have. That was all to let you know that the Passion of Love is indeed affected by character attack and skill damage. So honestly, the play would to be have a decent amount of character attack while also having a decent amount of skill damage. Now let's talk about the partners that she has the best synergies with. Shuffle and Filbert is honestly a really strong pick because of the fact that when she does use her first ability, it heals and it gives you increased damage, not just attack or skill. It does increase damage, and that is a 56% boost. Now Tabitha is also a really strong pick for her because this boosts specifically skill damage, and she also does a further 8% when you get that last passive there. Another strong pick would actually be Daphne, not because of the heal or anything like that, but actually because she gives you a 40% crit chance, which is kind of insane. Now the last pick, which is the best in my opinion, is Margie here. Her passive gives you a buff for the entire battle that stacks at 20 at 2.8, that is 48%, and then once you get that passive there, that's a 45%, which is giving you about 88% raw attack. So honestly, she's like one of her best partners in the game at the moment. Believe it or not, the weapon wedges actually don't matter at all unless you're going to be using the fervor, which does give you that bonus 20% movement speed whenever you do kill something. But 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be using it for AFK farming, and this is a skill damage based build. We're not doing any type of weapon damage, so if you're looking for that, I can make a separate video on that, but this is purely about her skill damage. Cue the AFK montage. Now I would like to remind you guys that this was my test build for skill range and, you know, sacrificing damage, and as you can see, I was still relatively beating that rather easily. Even the times when I let my health fall, though, I was still beating it rather easily. So if you were to swap to just the pure damage build, it's gonna be a cakewalk. Now let's go ahead and show you what she can do on a boss. Now that wasn't as fast as a character like Psyche. For one, I just kept messing up a lot of my setups. That's why my damage was as low as it was. And once again, keep in mind, this is my ranged build. This is not just pure DPS. Range, more range to cover up everything. And she was still shredding things relatively easy, and that was without using her ultimate. So if you go the straight damage build, you're going to really be shredding everything rather easily. And I personally just love Rebecca. She was my favorite character back when the game did have gacha in the CBT, and she's my favorite character now. The fact that they even gave her free was actually quite insane, but then again, all the characters are basically free since you can farm them. But that's gonna be it for me, guys. Go ahead and get out of here.